Let's talk about the Aluu story, one of the greatest tragedy to come out of Africa. I know I have done a few clips on it, but I feel it deserves its own true crime special, where we would dig deep and see from every angle of what really happened on the 5th of October 2012 in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, Nigeria. So if you're ready, press the like button and let's get into it. Trigger warning is officially in effect. The story of the Aluu tragedy is that of 4 University of Port Harcourt boys who were brutally lynched to their death on the 5th of October 2012 under a very controversial circumstance. The big question here is, were these boys really cultists or were they set up? Another question I'm going to add here is, who is really to blame for this tragedy? Clearly, the killers are responsible for their actions, but how many actions or lack of actions thereof led to this haunting tragedy that would forever leave a mark in the city of Port Harcourt? All 4 boys, Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika and Tekena, were friends. They had a close relationship. Ugonna, however, was the glue to the circle. He is the main character of this story. Lloyd was said to be his cousin, so that is how they were related. Tekena was his childhood friend and longtime best friend, and Chiadika was his roommate. So this was the basis of their friendship. This is how they were all linked together. Although they were in different faculties and departments, they still made time to hang out whenever they could. Another character in this tragedy is a man called Coxon Lerebori Lucky, also known as Bright. Now, the relationship between Bright and Ugonna is unclear, but it was said that Bright owed Ugonna money. Whatever deal they had wasn't stated, but what we know is that Bright was indebted to Ugonna. Another thing that is not also clear is whether or not Bright was a student of the university or whether or not he was just an indigene of the Aluu community where the school is located. But it was said that whenever Ugonna reached out to Bright to pay up, Bright would always post him. Bright was said to be dodging Ugonna, avoiding him, always trying to get out of the situation. Whenever Ugonna calls him for the money, he would always make up excuses. He would always say something like, I will give you next week. And when the next week reached, he will make up another excuse that he lost someone in the family and that he has traveled and that something came up. It became a thing of torture for Ugonna to actually get back the money Bright was owing him. It was almost clear to Ugonna that Bright was playing him like a ball, and Ugonna did not like it. Another thing that was said was that Ugonna didn't know where Bright lived, so I guess this is why I think Bright must have not been a student. So on his own, Ugonna did some investigation to find out where Bright lived in the community because he didn't know his particular house. So he wanted to know where Bright lived so that he would go and meet him in person. And after a while, Ugonna got the address location of where Bright stayed in Aluu, and it was deep inside the heart of Aluu community. Some sources claim that after finding out the address of Bright, Ugonna personally went to his house to see him a few times, but whenever he also got there, Bright was not always around, or either he would be around and, stay quiet inside his room to pretend like he's not around, or tell neighbors to tell him that he's not around. And this frustrated Ugonna some more. It was almost like, okay, this Bright is really pushing it. Now, this is where the story begins. Surprisingly, there are 2 versions to this journey towards the tragedy. There are 2 stories on how this happened. The first one is what is generally publicized, it's everywhere on the internet, while the second one is not very common. It's just known with words of mouth. So basically, the second version is just a story that is only commonly known by those people who were around the school and who lived in Port Harcourt at the time of this incident. So the first version states that when Ugonna finally got frustrated with the fact that Bright wasn't turning up and Bright was playing him, he told his friends clearly that, okay, this guy has been playing me and he has been using my head. And all 4 of them saw that it was messed up, and they all agreed that they would pay Bright a surprise visit at a time that they were sure he would be home. So as early as 2-3 a.m. in the morning of the 5th of October 2012, all 4 boys were on their way to Bright's house. Now, some sources claim that they had weapons with them. They carried machete, axe, and other obvious weapons. But up till this day, I'm having a hard time believing it. I don't believe these guys were with weapons. I mean, if they were with guns or penknife, that would have made sense because they could easily hide it. But to say that these boys carried machete, axe, and other obvious weapons, what, chainsaw, that is ridiculous. Because for a fact, if they were carrying these weapons at the dead of the night, walking in groups, heading to someone's house inside the community, I would believe they would have been stopped and apprehended long before they even got to Bright's house. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I would like to know. It doesn't really make sense to think that these 4 university boys carried massive weapons and they were able to penetrate through the vigilantes guiding the community without being stopped. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. And if for some reason they entered a motorcycle to get there, because a motorcycle was the common means of transportation around Aluu community at the time, I believe the bikeman or bikemen who would carry them would also be suspicious of their movements. So I don't think these boys carried those weapons because they would have definitely not made it to Bright House. But let's go on with the story. The story says that these boys carried the weapons and they eventually got to Bright's house, and they forced their way in, clearly because knocking would not do any good, and it was very, very early in the morning. Very early in the morning, almost like it's still midnight, according to some sources. Okay, so now they've gotten into Bright's house. Now, let's put in mind that this Bright is someone who has been postponing, playing, lying, and dodging Ugonna for almost a month or so. And now, finally, Ugonna has seen the guy that has been toying with him. Regardless of the time, regardless of the situation, obviously, to someone outside, this wouldn't look good. Clearly, maybe the boys didn't see it from the point of other people's perspective, them coming to someone's house at that time of the night and harassing the person, but it is human nature for someone to actually get angry at someone who has been playing them. So clearly, when Ugonna saw Bright, he had to lash out. I personally would have thrown him a punch, honestly. And I think that is where the situation got out of hand. It was said that the boys and Bright began to exchange words. There was a scuffle, there was an argument, they went back and forth. Voices were being raised at that time of the night. And so they also began to seize his computer, his television, some other properties that he had, as much as the boys could carry, because Bright also didn't have the money to pay, and so they had to take all of these things. Now, some sources claim that Bright was the one who raised alarm and called thief and drew the crowd's attention. However, there are some claims that Bright didn't raise the alarm, and frankly speaking, with the situation, I don't think he needs to even raise the alarm. Their voices were loud according to neighbors, and so it's very possible that one of the neighbors had heard him begging and crying and fighting. Probably the neighbor peeped out of the window and saw 4 boys taking things out of his apartments. Obviously, this wouldn't look good to anyone looking from the outside, and I think maybe the boys didn't think it through. They probably didn't think it through that this would not look good at that time of the day, and before they know it, a group of vigilantes confronted them. But then there was not exact time for that conversation. The vigilantes, to them, they have caught a thief, and the boys also tried to explain to the vigilante that they were not thieves, but you know, it was almost hard to do so. And I guess maybe Bright would have spoken up for them, but it's almost hard to speak up for these people. I don't know how else you can try to convince these vigilantes that these people who had just come to rob your house, take your property, yell at you, beat you, are not thieves or criminals or anything. And it's almost hard for Bright to probably have defended them. And if indeed he was the one who raised the alarm, of course he would look stupid defending them. So these boys were left to their fate, with the vigilantes who did not want to even hear anything they said. At the earlier time, the vigilantes claimed that they saw the boys with knives and cutlass and the weapons. This is where they claimed that the knives and the weapons came. But when the police got to the scene, when questions were asked, none of these weapons were provided. The axe and the knife did not show up. Even in the video, we did not see the weapons. So where exactly were the weapons that people claimed that these boys carried? It wasn't shown. But those were the claims of the vigilante, that these boys were with weapons. And regardless of their explanation that they were students and that Bright was owing them money, they were still dragged, stripped, and paraded. So as early as 4, 5, this was going on. the boys were being interrogated, they were still saying that they were not thieves, they were still saying that they were not cultists, they were being tortured and beaten one by one slowly, they were taken from one compound to another. It was said that they were also taken to the traditional ruler of the community to see what had happened, but it's unclear if the traditional ruler gave them the go ahead to do what they were doing. So over time, more people are hearing that a group of thieves have been caught. Over time, the words were going around, and the day was getting bright also around us 5, 6, and so more people were awake to see this. More people were coming from different compounds to just see the thieves that have been caught. They have been beaten and stripped. At the same time, the boys were still trying to explain to them that they were not thieves. The boys most likely thought that they were going to be handed over to the police, and I guess that is why a lot of them were patient and they didn't fight back. They were just thinking that this was going to go to the police station. But them being paraded for the entire community clearly did not pass that message. Over time, more people saw them, and someone who recognized Tekena quickly called his sister and told her that, see, your brother has been caught in a web of danger. And instantly, it was said that Ugona's sister made her way to the scene. But by the time she got there, the boys have been taken to a burrow pit, a pit where they usually throw dustbins. They've all been laid on the ground in a mud of dirty waters, and they've also had a ring of tire over their head like a necklace. And although they had not started setting them ablaze, they were being hit with sticks repeatedly on their head. And even in the video of this lynching, you could hear the boys still explaining that, that they were students, and some of them even said that they had just paid their school fees, and the crowd wasn't even having it. That was the bad part of this. The crowd in the community were already pissed and angry, and they just didn't want to hear this boys talk. And so Tekena's sister was said to have approached the man leading the lynching, the man heading it, and she tried to explain to them that the boy is her brother and they are all his friends, and that they were not thieves or cultists. But it was said also that these men threatened to also throw her in the mix if she doesn't stop vouching for them. I can't imagine the trauma that girl must have endured witnessing her brother and his friends being killed in that manner. You see, it's one thing to be called on the phone and told that a loved one has been killed. It's another thing to stand and watch them being killed and unable to do anything. This is a nightmare for everybody. For everybody. I don't think there is anyone who can withstand this situation. I don't know how someone cannot run mad after seeing such a tragedy happen before them, especially to their loved one. I don't know where she is. I really hope she's fine. I hope this trauma is behind her, and God knows, if I ever get a chance to meet her in person, I would like to have a discussion with her regarding this experience. It is one experience that I just can't imagine going through. It was also said that during the parade, a group of policemen at a certain point during the parading of the boys, a group of policemen were alerted, and I don't think the policemen were together. It was okay, let's just say individually they met policemen at certain point, and one self was also at the scene where the boys were being lynched, but he wasn't equipped enough, and so he couldn't do anything. And to all the policemen, about 4 of them, they met at certain times, they also couldn't stop them, and it was said about 2 of them went back to the station to mobilize, but before they could come back to the scene, the boys had already been killed. So that is the first version of the story. Now let's talk about the second version, the one I told you that is not very popular, the one I told you that only people in Port Harcourt might have known about it or heard about it because it was what was circulating in words of mouth at the time. Now, in the second version, it was said that these 4 boys, on their way to Bride's house, they met someone whose name we do not know, but his description was said to be that of a bouncer. He was a big, intimidating looking guy that they met on their way to Bride's house. He wasn't supposed to be in the plan. He wasn't in the initial group to go and meet Bright. So they were just walking out of their lodge. So on their way out into the road to where Bright stay in the community, they saw this big looking guy who was probably gymming at the time they met him, and they were all friends, they know each other, and the guy asked them where they were going, and they explained the situation to him, that somebody had been playing them and using their head, that they're going to block the person at his apartment to get the money that he was owing them. And the guy was like, okay, can I come with you guys? Apparently maybe he was bored. It was said that he felt, or the boys felt, that bringing him along would really put fear into Bright to make him pay up. So when the big intimidating guy offered to join them, they were like, why not? Let's go. I mean, with you, with us, we are most likely going to feel very sure, or they will most likely feel secured on their way there, since it was also dead at night. I guess that was the reason why they went with this bouncer looking guy. So still according to this second version, when they got to Bright's house with this bouncer looking guy, it was said clearly the bouncer guy was the one doing the intimidating and beating and shaking of Bright, and it was said that it was because of this big guy and the fact that Bright may have not also been familiar with the other people. Remember, Bright only had a deal with Ugonna, so for Bright to most likely see this big guy and 3 other boys he had not seen, I guess that was what made him panic to the point he yelled thief, thief, because regardless of the fact that Bright knows Ugonna, let's be clear here, the situation looks sketchy. If I personally see a group of men in my neighbor's house that I had not seen before, I would yell thief. Or if I also was approached by somebody I know with a group of other people that I do not know, and they were coming to threaten or beat me even though I was owing them money, I also might yell thief. So I'm not going to say I stand with Bright, but I see the reason why he would have yelled thief. I see the reason why he would have called and raised alarm. And if there was a big bouncer looking guy that is intimidating, oh man, I will shout thief too. I'm sorry, I will yell thief. But not to be on Bright's side, I'm sure he probably didn't see that these boys were going to end up the way they did. Maybe he wouldn't have yelled thief. Maybe if Bright had a second chance to see what the end result of him yelling thief would have done, he most likely may not have. I don't think anybody would want that for somebody, regardless of who they were or what they were trying to do to them. When Bright saw this bouncer guy, he yelled thief, he raised alarm, and of course instantly the vigilantes came. The vigilantes approached them and stopped them, and they all came in group to ask them what they were doing and why they were there. And so again, in this second version, the importance of this fifth guy, the importance of this fifth person that looked like a bouncer, actually suggests that he might have been the reason these boys were lynched and killed. Because when the vigilantes came, the boys were trying to explain to them that this is not the situation, that they had only come to draw the debt that Bright was owing them. They were hoping that the vigilantes themselves would even mediate the situation and help even make it make sense and probably help the boys come to an agreement. So while these boys were explaining to the vigilantes, trying to tell them that they are not thieves and that they were students who had come to draw debt from a guy who had been playing and posting them, the crowd was pulling in. More people were gathering. Neighbors were opening their doors to look. More people were coming from other compounds to see what was going on. So the crowd was increasing. More boys were coming, and they were all coming with sticks and weapons as though they had actually seen thieves. So while the vigilantes were listening to Ugonna and the boys explain their situation, the bouncer, the big guy, the fifth guy, saw that this crowd was getting out of hand. He also saw how aggressive the crowd was becoming. Maybe at some point the vigilantes told the boys, sit down there, kneel down there, try to belittle them, punish them in a way to show that they are not a threat. And the bouncer guy, being who he is, refused to comply and decided to bring out a gun, flashing the gun, threatening to shoot, and with that advantage, he was able to run away. Now, that fifth guy running away after showing them guns and flashing them and threatening to shoot them, kind of gave the vigilantes and the youths and the angry mob the impression that these guys were thieves. It kind of even made it difficult for these 4 boys to explain that they were not thieves. It's like, how are you going to say you are not thieves and the 5th guy you came with showed us a gun and threatened to shoot? How do we believe you now? So this was the situation. This was how the second version of this story went. And because of that, the boys, they couldn't listen to the boys anymore. They didn't trust the boys anymore, that they were not students, and basically just lynched them to death. Now, another thing to note is that the community at the time, the Aluu community at the time, was facing a lot of crisis. At the time this happened, there had been series of rapes, series of armed robbery, series of break-ins. There have been numerous criminal activities that had been going on in the Aluu community, and the police were not doing anything. The police were not securing their properties. Girls were being raped and killed. People were being robbed. Houses were being burgled into. So this was the situation at the time in Aluu community. So the community boys decided to set up a vigilante themselves to protect themselves. And I guess this is what may have added to the situation. Maybe if the police were doing their job, maybe if the police were arresting and fixing the problems that they had, maybe these people would have trusted them enough to hand these boys over to them. But the police were a non-factor. Aluu itself was being run and protected by the vigilantes themselves, which is why even when the police came, they didn't want to give the boys to the police, because they felt the police have not been doing anything for the long run. They felt maybe if they take this law into their hands, the police will do a better job, which is why most times I feel like I'm going to blame this Aluu crisis on the police themselves, because they were clearly not doing their job. Imagine being there in the scene and seeing these boys being killed, and you did not do anything. You stood there. The ones who even ran back to the police station took a long time. Clearly, the youth took the laws into their hands and senselessly ended the lives of these boys. Very senselessly. So after this incident happened, clearly the police soon arrived, but before they got there, the boys had been killed. It was said that some of them were rushed to the hospital, but they all died on arrival. I think one of them also died in the hospital itself. The family was alerted. The videos of them being lynched instantly went viral, even getting to CNN. The whole world was watching Port Harcourt for almost a week. And thanks to the video that went viral, the people who did the killing directly were identified, and immediately the police started a manhunt for them. Many of them were arrested. About 20-something people were arrested, even some of the people in the crowd. There was a woman who even said something to the boys saying, okay, you're a student and you're here. Why are you here if you're a student? And that particular woman was also arrested. The traditional ruler of the community was arrested. Almost 20 of them were arrested. So in July of 2017, after many years of court battle, about 3 of the suspects, 3 of the culprits who were involved in the direct beating and killing of these young men were all sentenced to death. The sergeants and the other people were probably, given a lighter punishment. I'm not particularly sure. Then the other suspects who were also arrested were let go as to the fact that they were not directly involved in the killing, that they were merely onlookers. But the good thing about the story is that the 2 men, the 3 people who lifted their hands to strike the heads and put tires on these boys were sentenced to death, and that is justice in its finest. The family of the boys were happy that justice was served. Now, whatever happened to Bright, it's unclear. Honestly, I have to say this. Nothing so much was said about Bright, although it was said that he was arrested at some point. Yes, he was arrested at some point, but I don't think he faced trials. I don't think he faced the law, and I don't think he was sentenced. Maybe he was one of the guys who was sentenced with a different name, but with the name that we know him to be, the Coxon Larry Burry Lucky, it wasn't said that anyone with that name was also even tried or sentenced. Because in plain text, in plain sense, he wasn't the one who did the killing. He merely just puts them in the trouble. And I guess on his own part, it's not wrong for him to raise alarm that he was being robbed. It's not wrong for him to yell thieves, because he probably wouldn't have known what could have happened to him with the boys, and if the second version is true, with the bigger boys. The fact is, the people who did the killing were the ones who faced the law, and they were the ones who deserved the death penalty. So guys, this is the story of the Aluu Fort tragedy to the best of my knowledge. I've done a few clips on it. I just really wanted to do a major story where I go in-depthly to all the corners that I can, reach out to. So I hope you enjoyed the video, or I hope the video touched you. Clearly this is going to be a sad story to hear or listen, but I hope this video got to you, and if it got to you, give me a like. Don't forget to share with your friends, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification buttons if you haven't. And also let me know if you know about the second version of the story. Now I can't confirm whether it's true or not, but it was what was going around. So if you've heard the second version of the story, let me know. And another thing I want you to also let me know, do you actually think that Bright himself should have faced the law? Do you think Bright himself was just as guilty as those who killed him? Do you think Bright himself should have been at least sentenced or punished for something, because he most likely raised a alarm that turned out to be false? Let me know your thoughts on Bright, and also let me know your general view on this story. Thank you for watching.